So welcome everyone to part 4 of the Dobra Tea Club. So this month I'm filming in the Nook. The Nook is a beautiful Airbnb in Swannanoa just outside of Asheville. I've had the pleasure of staying here this weekend, so I thought I'd go ahead and film a video here. So this month we're going to be talking about Pu'erh Tea. We're going to be talking about the beginnings of trade of tea out of China and the tea horse road. And we're going to be talking about Yunnanese tea and the Pu'erh boom of 2007. So let's begin. So let's begin today by just brewing our first tea of the day, the Nannuo ancient tree Sheng Pu'erh. And so as always, we're just going to go ahead and start with just a rinse of the vessels here. And just pouring this water off. And so the weight of dry leaf for this tea, we recommend 8 grams. So this is just a recommendation because Pu'erh tea is often compressed, and so as it opens up, you're going to start to get fresh leaves as you go along. Just a personal preference, I almost with every tea stick to a 4-gram weight of dry leaf. So it's totally up to you. 4 grams just for me works really well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw my 4 grams into here. And so with Pu'erh tea, a rinse of the leaves first is nice to go because a lot of times it's aged and a lot of times it's compressed. So you want to start to open up the leaves and remove like any dust or anything else that may be on the outside of the tea. So you just pour a little bit of water on and you go ahead and pour off. And this rinse as well starts to give us this initial aroma of the tea. We call this an awakening of the leaves. So beautiful kind of fruit-like aroma to this tea. And then we're just going to pour off this rinse. Again, a rinse is optional. If you want to go ahead and drink that rinse infusion, it's totally fine. And then we're going to go ahead and start our first infusion. And so with these teas, we're going to be doing boiling all day. So pour the water straight on over the leaves. And with Pu'erh tea, I like to do just pretty short infusions. Just really only not much more than about 10 seconds. So just a quick infusion and then pour off. And so let's check out this infusion color here. And so again, this is a Sheng Pu'erh, and we'll talk about the difference in production in a little bit here. But so this is a Sheng Pu'erh, which they call a raw Pu'erh. So the color is still fairly light, with a little bit of a darkness to it, but a fairly light color of the infusion. And so let's taste. So a little bit earthy, but you still get those really beautiful fruity notes to it. A little bit earthy, almost a leathery feel to it. But this is a young Sheng Pu'erh, so very vibrant and bright. But yeah, earthy is just a really solid undertone to this flavor. Okay, so you can enjoy this infusion here, and then when brewing Pu'erh tea, you're gonna be able to do multiple infusions with this tea. So you can continue to pour boiling water on, and you do short infusions, and you're gonna be able to do many infusions off of this tea. So, and as the tea begins to open up, you're going to get different flavor profiles, and it's actually going to get stronger as it goes along. So, yeah, enjoy. So to describe what Pu'erh Tea is can be relatively complicated. So strictly speaking, Pu'erh Tea comes from the Yunnan province of China and is produced from the Da-Ye cultivar. Teas that are produced in a similar fashion to Pu'erh Tea outside of the Yunnan province of China in neighboring countries or neighboring provinces, some people believe that this is not actually Pu'erh Tea and that Pu'erh Tea has to come from the Yunnan province of China. And if you remember from our discussions in the origins of tea, the Yunnan province is one of these places where we theorize that Camellia sinensis, or the tea plant, originally grew. And still to this day in the Yunnan province of China, especially in the Sichuan jungle in southern Yunnan, you can find old growth tea trees of upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 years old. So let's talk about the processing of Pu'erh Tea. So as always, it starts with the harvest of the leaves. And so with Pu'erh Tea, we're going to use a little bit more mature tea leaves. So you're going to allow the leaves to be a little bit larger in the picking grade. And so after harvest, you're going to take the fresh leaves and you're going to do a pan frying process or a shaching process. And this pan frying process is similar to green tea, but with a little bit lower temperature. And again, this pan frying process is used to stop the oxidation in the leaves. And so after the pan frying process, you're going to do a sun drying process. And the sun drying process is very important for Pu'erh Tea production. And so after the sun drying process, you have what we call malcha, or unfinished tea. And so with this malcha, you have the choice to make two different styles of tea, Sheng Pu'erh or Shou Pu'erh. So for Sheng Pu'erh, you're taking the malcha and you're compressing it into cakes, and that's it. And this is what we call raw Pu'erh. And so with these cakes, you can either drink it very young or you can age it for years or even decades. And the second style of processing is Shou Pu'erh. So you're going to take the malcha and you're going to pile it in large warehouses to ferment. And so these large piles of the malcha will then be moistened and sometimes covered with tarps to create a heat to produce the fermentation process. And this fermentation process will last from about 1 to 2 months. And it will ferment the leaves and create a darker color to the leaves. And so when the fermentation process is complete, you then can either sell the tea loose or press it into cakes and then age it or drink it fresh. And so again, this aging will be from years to decades. So another thing that's going to differentiate different Pu'erh teas is going to be actually the age of the tea tree that the tea comes from. So the Yunnan province has wild tea trees of very old age growing throughout the jungles, and you have producers tending to groves of these old tea trees. The majority of the tea growing world, you find young trees of about 15 to 30 years old growing on these tightly rowed terrace teas. But in Yunnan, you have these old tea trees growing amongst other trees deep in the jungles. And so you have a different levels of age for which these teas come from. You have Jiaoshu, which is 0 to 50 years old. You have Zhongshu, which is 50 to 100 years old. You have Dashu, which is 100 to 200 years old. And then you have Gushu, which is over 200 years old. And so the Sheng Pu'erh that we're drinking here is actually an authentic Gushu, where it's coming from tea trees of over 200 years old. It's very cool. So to better understand the origins of Pu'erh tea, it's important to talk about the tea horse road. So throughout Chinese history, the Chinese were engaged in different wars with their neighbors, the Tibetans and the Mongolians. And the Tibetans and the Mongolians were skilled horse riders, and the Chinese not so much. And this ability to ride a horse well was advantageous in warfare against the Chinese. And so in an attempt to fortify their military with more horses, the Chinese began trading tea with their neighbors, the Tibetans and the Mongolians. And you have the birth of the tea horse road. And so the tea horse road was trading tea from the southwestern region of China in the Yunnan province and the Sichuan province. And so these old roads would run through the towns in the Yunnan province where you find modern day Pu'erh tea. And so these roads would then go over the mountains through treacherous terrain. And so to transport this tea, they began pressing the tea into cakes. And so you have the birth of what we now know as cake tea. And so the tea horse road is also one of the origins of China beginning to trade with the outside world. And so you have the tea horse road and then later the Silk Road. And these trade routes were instrumental in China becoming a global superpower through trade. Okay, so let's jump into our second tea of the day, the Nannuo fire. And this is a Shou Pu'erh. And so to brew this tea, you can use your gaiwan. It's going to work just fine. But I like to use a clay pot for brewing Shou Pu'erh. The clay pot can kind of taper some of that astringency in these darker teas. So that's why I like to use this for something dark like a Shou Pu'erh. So I'm just going to switch my teapots out here. And then, so as always, I'm just going to do a little bit of a rinse of the leaves, or of the teapot. Bit of water on. And just pouring it through my vessels. And pouring the water off. And so let's start by just taking a look at the dry leaves here. It's compressed and it's going to be very dark. And so a little confusing thing, but in China, this is what they refer to as black tea. And what we refer to as black tea is what they refer to as red tea. So a little confusing, but black tea is actually red tea and fermented tea is black tea. And you'll also find black tea like this, fermented tea called heicha in neighboring provinces. So we're going to, so I have my 4 grams of this here. Again, we recommend 8 grams, but just a personal preference thing. I just use 4 grams across the board. It's just a kind of a weird personal preference that I do with tea. If you like stronger flavors, I would recommend the 8 grams, and especially because it's compressed, you can do shorter infusions, and as it goes along, the flavor is going to change and it's going to get stronger. So I'm going to go ahead and throw my 4 grams, and you throw in however many leaves you want with this. And I'm going to start by rinsing the leaves, just a little bit of water on. And again, this rinse is just going to just kind of rinse off the leaves and also begin to open up the compressed leaves as well. And so just really short, we're just going to pour right off. And just pour this off. And this also gives us a chance to awaken the leaves and get a little bit of the aroma. So very earthy, a lot darker. But that like rich earthiness to the aroma. Because again, this is fermented tea for about 2 months. It goes through a fermentation process. So we're going to pour the water on and start our first infusion. And once again, with these teas, I like to do just a very, very short infusion. And again, if you're using a larger amount of leaf, these short infusions are great because you're only getting, you're not getting a whole lot of astringency in the shorter infusions. And it will also get darker as it goes along as the compressed leaves begin to open up. So just a short infusion, we'll pour it off. And we'll take a look at this color here. And so you start to understand why they call this black tea, because the color in the infusion is basically black. And again, as you infuse, it's going to get darker, and it's going to get even, the color is going to get darker and darker and blacker as you go along. So let's go ahead and taste. Yeah, that really rich earthiness to it. But this tea is really cool because it has a interesting sweetness to it. It's a very mellow Shou Pu'erh. Shou pu'ers a lot of times are just that really rich, dark, almost muddy flavor. But yeah, so this is going to be a fun tea as you go along to keep doing infusions, just to notice how the flavor changes with this tea. So both of the both of the teas that we've been drinking today are from the same producer. Her name is Dabra in Nannuo Mountain. So the Nannuo Shan, that's the mountain that this comes from in the Sichuanbana jungle. And so pu'erh teas a lot of times are going to be named after the specific mountains that they come from. And you know, people that study pu'erh will notice flavor differences in each mountain throughout the same region. And each mountain will have its own distinct flavors and its own draw for pu'erh fanatics. So the deeper you get into pu'erh is just this deep rabbit hole into some people say, you know, one of the original styles of tea, because again, the Yunnan province is one of the origins of tea in the entire world. So pu'erh tea is interesting in that it is one of the oldest, if not the oldest style of tea, because it comes from the Yunnan province, and this is one of the heartlands of tea and tea production. But for most of Chinese history, pu'erh tea was often overlooked or seen as kind of a backwoods tea. But in the last century, you start to see this uptick in interest in pu'erh tea. And in a cresting point in 2006 and 2007, you have the pu'erh boom. And so what happened is collectors in Hong Kong and Taiwan started buying tea cakes, pu'erh tea cakes, and storing them in their pu'erh storage caves. And they started to sell them at market for higher and higher prices, and eventually started to get exponentially high prices for these tea cakes. And so this rising of prices brought interest into the Yunnan province of China. And so people would travel into these small villages throughout Yunnan to buy up their fresh leaves because they were getting higher and higher prices. And so tea leaves that were once selling for very small amounts were now selling for super high prices. And it continued to raise until the summer of 2007, when the pu'erh prices reached their peak, and then you have this crash of the market. And so you have the pu'erh boom and crash of 2007. But what this brought about was more interest in each of these individual mountains in the Sichuanbana jungle of Yunnan, and this increased interest in pu'erh and pu'erh cakes. And so Sheng pu'erh is a more traditional style of how the locals will drink pu'erh, but now you're starting to see this emergence of fermentation and Shou pu'erh in pu'erh. And so pu'erh is this really cool rabbit hole that people will go down. And so, you know, with this, I invite you to continue to explore deeper into this really fascinating subject of pu'erh tea. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this class. And so I thank you all so much. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me or you can comment in the comment section below. But yeah, thank you and have a great month.